Welcome to High-End Homes Handled Right, the real property management luxury podcast, hosted by yours truly, Lyndel Johnson. You know, this is a great time to be here because this is episode number 1. You can always say you've done many things in your life, but being on the first episode, having an episode like this, and actually being able to say, I remember that first episode of that podcast called High-End Homes Handled Right. Well, this is the opportunity to say that and to be a part of this. My name is Lyndel Johnson, and I am a owner of a property management company in Texas. A little more about myself. I'm a retired Marine as well. After retirement, I decided to go into real estate, and now owning a property management company, I love to give back to other managers, other investors that basically want to learn tools in order to gain the best return on their investment. In today's episode, we're going to talk about different types of investors. You've got accidental investors and you have intentional investors. What's the difference? Well, an accidental investor is an investor who, let's just say, boyfriend, girlfriend, they're dating, and they both have a house. They decide to get married. When they get married, now they have an extra house, and they're thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this second house? We'll say that's an accidental investor. You know, they didn't intend to purchase this property in order to gain anything from it. That's where they were living, and now they consolidated into one house. Another example of an accidental investor is, let's say someone had passed away in your house, in your family, and they passed down this house to you. With this house, you now have to figure out, how do I rent this house? How much should I rent it for? How do I make sure that I have the best possible tenant that will take care of this property? Because once again, not only do I care about gaining something from it, but I also want to make sure I take care of a piece of property, an asset that was in my family for many years. You know, with this podcast, we'll make sure that we answer some of those questions. And last but not least, you've got the intentional investor. This is an investor who, that's what they do. They love to go out. They love to look for properties. They look for the best deal possible to get that ROI. And we'll also help that intentional investor as well. But for this episode number 1, we're going to talk about the steps that you need to take once you have that property. You know, we've got that rental property. What do we do now? Every property manager and homeowner / investor basically will have to think about the same things. First steps are, we need to figure out, you know, when we have a tenant, how much are we going to charge? How do you decide that? So what you would do is you would basically go into the area and pull comps. You'll find out what homes that are similar to yours are actually rented for. Once you do that, then you can decide, okay, when I have a tenant, how much of a deposit will I request? How much will late fees be? Late fees, based on your area, there are rules that basically regulate how much of late fees you can charge. Here in Texas, what we do is we do 12%. We charge 12% of late rent. And not every property management company does that, but that's what we do here. You know, we charge 12%, and then that is rent that's late. Being late is considered anything that's received after the second. So rent is due on the first. On the second, you're giving some leeway. On the third, that is when that late you get that late fee. You also then have to decide, how are you going to get paid by the tenant? Do you want money orders? Will you receive checks? Do you have a portal or some type of software that you're going to use? In this podcast, you know, later on, we will talk about different softwares that you can use. But you have to think about that before you put the house on the market. Deposits. How much of a deposit are you going to receive? Is it going to be the same amount as rent? Or is it going to be 2 times the rent? That's something also you need to decide before you market the property. And reason being is you want to make sure that when you market this property, all that information is there for your prospective tenant. The goal should always be that when a tenant moves in, there are no surprises. They aren't going to call you and they're going to ask, hey, you didn't tell me about this fee, because then you lose trust. Your goal as a property owner or a property manager is to make sure that you have a tenant that not only takes care of your property, but that loves where they live. And in order for that tenant to love where they live, they have to trust you. And you have to make sure that you take care of them and make sure that the house that they are living in is at the standard that you advertised. So making sure everything that's in the pictures is there, making sure that the fees that you will charge is actually noted up front and that they know the fees that are going to take place. Once we do all that and we're marking the property, we've taken quality pictures, we tend to actually we recommend that we're actually have done some type of inspection before the tenant moves in. The purpose of your inspection is when you walk through this property, you want to make sure that you have a record of what that property looked like before the tenant moved in. If a tenant moves in and they're there for about a year and they're about to move out and you now are going to the property and you see holes in the wall and you see ports that may not work, or you may see issues, and you can't take that from the deposit, or you shouldn't, I should say, take that from their deposit if you can't prove that the property wasn't like that before. So what I recommend is you go to the property, do an inspection, have a record of that inspection. And so when that tenant moves out, you can compare the property to what that initial inspection was. And later on other episodes, we'll talk about really how to do that in detail, because you can't and you should not charge for little things. Like if they live there for a year and you have small little holes in little different locations where they put picture frames, that is normal wear and tear. So you are charging for their deposit for things that are outside of that normal wear and tear. And that's a fine line. I mean, it's very subjective. But you really want to make sure that you're honest and you're taking care of the tenant, not only while they're there, but as they move out. It's your reputation on the line. So you want to really give that top-notch service and just be honest and just do the right thing. So now that you've got the marketing out, you've got now applications coming in, then we have to decide, how we're going to screen your applicants. Make sure that when you do have a tenant screening, that you are doing it the same way across the board. If you are having a limit, or should I say, you want your credit score to be at a certain range, make sure that's the same thing that you're judging everybody. So what I recommend is write down your screening criteria. Make sure that it's somewhere where if an applicant requests that criteria, you can easily show them. So whatever that is, make sure that it's the same criteria you're using it for everyone. And some of the criteria would be, you can look at their income. Make sure they make about 2 to 2.5 times the rent. You're going back and looking at their rental history. You're looking into their credit score. These are just some of the things that you can do. Now, what I also recommend is create a spreadsheet. So let's just say you've got 3 or 4 applicants that have now turned in their application to you. Put down their scores on that spreadsheet. So one may have a 750 credit score. The other one has a 775. The other person has a 780. And then the next row, one person makes $80,000 a year. The other one makes 65. The other one makes 7, and basically score them out. So when you do select your applicant, it's based on just numbers. It's not on the person's personality, and you just don't accidentally select based off of your own bias that you may not know that you have. So if you just go off of that, the straight data, the straight numbers, and which is based on that screening criteria, that keeps you out of trouble. And so you really want to make sure you do something like that and really paying attention to the fair housing rules. Make sure that before you even move forward with the screening criteria, look into that fair housing, making sure you don't discriminate on race, color, disability, sex. Fair housing is a real big deal in property management. And you need to really make sure that you go over it. And this is something that in later episodes, we'll also go into detail about fair housing and how it came about and really, its purpose. And we'll just dive into that in later episodes. Once you actually now have this applicant that you've screened, you've approved, you've decided how you're going to receive your deposit, then you need to really dive into how you're going to communicate with this tenant. Do you want them to text you? How are they going to, contact you for maintenance orders? Are they going to call you? Are they going to use a portal that we're going to talk about in later episodes? All these things you need to think about prior to anyone moving in. If you have all these things smoothed out, it is going to be smooth sailing, or as much as you can have it happen. The goal really, once again, is get great tenants, have tenants that are happy to live there, and then also to make sure that you are actually getting the rent amount that is suitable for that market. There is nothing worse than having rent. For example, if the market is $1,500, here, where in our market, the average is about $2,500. So if the market is $2,500, but their rent is at $2,000 a month, that's not good. And that happens when owners are desperate. Say the house was on the market, they really weren't marketing it correctly. So the first person that came through, they brought them in and they approved them at a lower rent amount. Now that puts you in a big problem, because when that year comes up and it's time to renew, there is a cap of how much you could actually have a renewal be at, what percentage. For example, in California, they're putting it at 10%, which means that you can't increase the rent more than 10% after a lease has been completed. So this just means that you probably will never hit that market rent for a while. And that happens often. That happens a lot. And when that does happen, you've got an owner / investor that has to decide, do I renew with this tenant who's been amazing, or do I deny the renewal and then having to put the house back on the market, meaning the tenant moves out, then having to send a maintenance team to go in, having to do a make ready, which is getting the house ready to put back on the market, and then do marketing again, and then to start the leasing process. That entire time, you're not gaining anything from that house. There's no rent being received, and all you're doing is spending that money to get the house back on the market. So that's why the best thing to do is to make sure on the front end that you get a tenant in there for the right price. Get them there at the right price. Then you can increase your rent after the lease is at maybe 3%, 5%. But as they're renewing, you're actually keeping your eye on that market to see whether you're at. So you're making sure you're at the market or slightly above the market. That should be your goal. Well, we're running out of time, so I would like to say thank you again for being a part of episode number 1. It's actually been fun. The next couple of episodes, we'll have several guests coming in, these industry experts, and we will definitely dive into how to really, really manage your property the best possible way. Once again, my name is Lyndel Johnson. This is High-End Homes Handled Right, the Real Property Management Luxury Podcast. Thank you for your time and have a great day.